Hi! In this video, we are going to learn on how to prove arguments using the different rules of inferences. And these arguments talks about the different sustainable development goals by the United Nations. Let's start. The first one is the sustainable development goal number 1, no poverty. And here is the argument. If SDG number 1, no poverty, aims to end poverty in all its forms everywhere, or individuals should have access to basic needs, then poverty levels decrease and achieve a more sustainable world. Solely SDG 1 No Poverty state that it's aiming to end all types of poverty in all forms everywhere. Individuals likely to have access to their basic needs every day. Thus, poverty levels decrease. Given the argument, we need to evaluate the different hypotheses. Hypothesis number 1. If SDG 1 No Poverty aims to end poverty in all its forms everywhere, or individuals should have access to basic needs, then poverty levels decrease and achieve a more sustainable world. As hypothesis number 2, solely SDG 1 No Poverty state that it's aiming to end all types of poverty in all forms everywhere. Hypothesis number 3, individuals likely to have access to their basic needs every day. And conclusion, thus poverty levels decrease. Since we have already cited the different hypotheses, we need to find the different statements. First is N. SDG 1 No Poverty aims to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. B. Individuals should have access to basic needs. T. Poverty levels decrease. And S. Achieve a more sustainable world. At this juncture, we are now going to translate or change the different hypotheses into its symbolic form. Number 1. N or B implies D and S. Number 2, N. And number 3, B. We need to prove D. In proving, in the first step, we are going to have N or B. And that is from addition of number 2 and number 3. Next is we're gonna have D and S. And we have used modus ponens on number 1 and number 4. Lastly, we have T using simplification of number 5. Since we have already cited the different hypotheses, we are now going to translate them into their symbolic form. Hypothesis number 1. N or B implies D and S. Hypothesis 2, N. Hypothesis 3, B. And we need to prove D. The first step that we are going to use is addition. We are going to add hypothesis 2 and hypothesis 3. Therefore, we'll end up with N or B. Next rule of inference is the modus ponens on number 1 and number 4. So the result will be D and S. Lastly, we are going to use simplification on number 5. So that will end up with D. And now, we have already proven D.
And the second one is Sustainable Development Goal number 3, good health and well-being. SDG number 3, if universal health coverage is not being resolved, then access to essential health services will not improve. Universal health coverage is not being resolved, either healthcare disparities will persist or access to essential health services will improve. Therefore, healthcare disparities will persist. Hypothesis of SDG number 3. Hypothesis 1. If universal health coverage is not being resolved, then access to essential health services will not improve. Hypothesis 2. Universal health coverage is not being resolved. Hypothesis 3. Either healthcare disparities will persist or access to essential health services will improve. Conclusion. Therefore, healthcare disparities will persist. Since we have now the hypothesis of SDG number 3, we will get the statement of SDG number 3. P. Universal health coverage is being resolved. Q. Access to essential health services will improve. R. Healthcare disparities will persist. Now we need to translate them into a symbol. Number 1, not P, then not Q. Number 2, not P. Number 3, R or Q. Therefore, we need to prove R. The first step we need to get is not Q. That is from 1 and 2, and that is modus tollens. And the last one is R, disjunctive syllogism, and that is from 3 and 4, and that is how we proven the R.
The last SDG that we are going to talk about, the Sustainable Development Goal number 13, climate action. The argument is, if climate change is effectively addressed, then greenhouse gas emissions are reduced. If greenhouse gas emissions are reduced, then global temperatures stabilize. If global temperatures stabilize, then extreme weather events decrease. climate change is not effectively addressed and greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. Therefore, extreme weather events do not decrease. Now, with a different hypothesis. Hypothesis 1, if climate change is effectively addressed, then greenhouse gas emissions are reduced. Hypothesis 2, if greenhouse gas emissions are reduced, then global temperatures stabilize. Hypothesis 3, if global temperatures stabilize, then extreme weather events decrease. Hypothesis 4, climate change is not effectively addressed and greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. And lastly, the conclusion would be, therefore, extreme weather events do not decrease. Now we are going to cite the different statements or propositions. P. Climate change is effectively addressed. Q. Greenhouse emissions are reduced. R. Global temperature will stabilize. S. Extreme weather events decreases. And T. Greenhouse emissions continue to rise. Now we are going to translate each hypothesis into their symbolic form. Hypothesis 1. P implies Q. Hypothesis 2. Q implies R. Hypothesis 3. R implies S. Hypothesis 4. Not P and T. And we need to prove not S. The first thing that we are going to use is the hypothetical syllogism on number 1 and number 2. Therefore, we'll end up with P implies R. The same rule will be applied on number 5 and number 3, hypothetical syllogism, so that we'll have P implies S. Now, we are going to use simplification on statement number 4, so that we'll have not P. And lastly, we're going to use modus tollens on statement 6 and 7, so that we'll have not S. Therefore, we have now proven not S.
Thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful.